Hey, this is Will with Everything No One Taught You About Money, and in this video, we're going to talk about the 7 reasons you're still not getting ahead financially. I'm actually going to tell you what the 7 are right now, and then we'll go through each one. So the number 1 reason you're not getting ahead financially is because you are paying off too much debt. No, I didn't say too little debt, you're paying off too much debt. Number 2, you are following 90s financial advice. Number 3, you are investing in qualified plans like retirement accounts, HSAs, and 529s. Number 4, you don't understand inflation. Number 5, you do not have a source of income that you can control and scale up. Number 6, you are trying to cut expenses to get ahead financially. And number 7, you are investing for appreciation only. So let's break down the first one a little more. You are paying off too much debt. What do I mean by that? I believe there's 3 kinds of debt. There's the obvious bad debt that everybody understands, credit card debt, right? At the date of this recording, interest rates on credit card debt are 18 to 25%. There's very little justification why anybody would not attack that and try to eradicate that as quickly as possible. There's also good debt. Good debt would be any kind of debt that makes you wealthier because it helps you acquire an asset that produces cash flow. And the last category of debt is what I call mediocre debt. It's debt that is definitely not making you richer, but if you pay it off aggressively and ahead of time, I think it actually makes you poorer. And we do have a link in the description to our debt score calculator, which will help you give each one of your debts a score, and you'll know if you should leave it alone or pay it off. So mediocre debt would be anything where it's going to take you a long time to pay it off. You know, a student loan might be an example of this, but you don't get any benefit from paying it off ahead of time. Because essentially what you're doing as you chunk away and chunk away and chunk away is you're taking hard-earned dollars that you need to have access to for a host of anything that could come up, investment opportunities, emergencies, adding a child to your family, and you're putting it where you can't get it, and it also doesn't benefit you. If you make payments, ahead of time and in excess of what you need to make on a student loan or whatever the case may be, whatever the loan is, for a year, let's say, and then in month 13 or 14 you have trouble and you can't make the payment, the bank doesn't care. You don't get any credit for making those, for chunking down ahead of time or for making the payments early. You also don't get any benefit at all for doing that until the loan is completely paid off. And at that time, the piece of your cash flow stream that the loan tied up becomes available, but not until you are 100% complete. So no benefit at 99%, 95%, 80%, 70% complete, no benefit whatsoever. You're taking money, you're putting it in a place where you can't get it, and it doesn't benefit you until it's 100% completely paid down. And again, what you're doing is you're kind of tying your hands. If it takes 4 years or 6 years to pay that loan off, what else could come up in that 4 to 6 years that you're gonna need money for? So this is a mistake I think a lot of us are making because it's gonna tie into the next one here, 90s financial advice. But that's what you've been told to do. You've been told to eradicate all debt as quickly as possible and then stay out of it. The reality of where we are economically as a nation today is that inflation is the biggest financial threat to a family. And so if inflation is the real threat, cash flow, in my opinion, cash flow has always been the most important thing, and I can prove that. Maybe I will later. But especially if we're devaluing the dollar at very high rates, then cash flow is the most important thing. We cannot self-impose limiting our cash flow, which is what we do when we try to eradicate mediocre debt faster than we need to. Reason number 2, you're not getting ahead financially. You're listening to 90s financial advice. Here's the deal. The narrative of financial advice that's out there on social media and has been passed down from your parents, and even that comes from your really awesome, well-meaning financial advisor, it's all 90s financial advice. What is 90s financial advice? 90s financial advice is advice that was created in the 90s for the economic climate at that time. What was the economic climate in the 90s? Use Google, go check it out. The average home price was around $150,000. Is anybody aware of what home prices are today? The housing market appreciated, maybe 3% a year. So 3% on $150,000 is not a big deal. In the 90s, the biggest financial threat to a family was not inflation like it is today. It was credit card debt, which is why there was so much pressure on eradicate all debt, especially credit card debt. 90s financial advice stressed doing a budget every single month, making sure every dollar has a home. It stressed investing in qualified plans and in the stock market. And there was kind of this undertone of if you have financial problems, it's because you were irresponsible and you screwed up. So we're still following that advice today, and everything has changed about the way money works. And that's why so many of you feel like you've done everything right, you've done everything you've been told to do, and you're hitting your head against a wall and you can't get ahead financially is because the advice that you're following is 35 years old. That is a long time ago. What we need is a new set of rules and a new playbook for what's going on today. Throw the 90s financial advice out the window. Reason number 3 you're not getting ahead financially. You're investing in qualified plans, which are retirement accounts, 401ks, IRAs, 529s, and HSAs. And this is probably ruffles some feathers. This is unpopular because a lot of us love our 529s and our HSAs, and that's fine. If you love it, that's fine. But here's what you got to understand. Again, if we go back to inflation is the biggest problem, the dollar being devalued, what that essentially means is if you're on a fixed income, most people are, you make $60 or $80 or $200,000 a year. Every time they print money, which is often, your salary shrinks. You take a pay cut. The nominal value is still the same. You're still making that $100,000 a year, $50,000 a year, but real value of that money has decreased. You took a pay cut. So when they printed, $5 trillion in 3 years between 2020 and 2022, took a massive pay cut. That's inflation. That's eroding of the dollar. So the way that we protect ourselves and get ahead in inflation is we need high cash flow. All of these strategies, right, are taking cash and putting it in a place where it doesn't benefit us today. It's really kind of potentially even arguable how much it benefits us in the future. And so again, we have self-imposed cash flow limitation. So when you put money in any of those accounts, a retirement account, for instance, you can't touch it until 59 and a half in most cases, unless you are willing to deal with taxes and penalties. So again, what can you imagine what is going to happen between now and 59 and a half? Let me ask you a question. How many presidents will there be between now and then? How many new laws will be written? How many macroeconomic events worldwide and nationwide will happen? How many houses or apartments are you going to move in and out of, whether you're renting or owning? Will you have more kids? Will your kids leave? Think of all these life events and then all the financial implications that could come with that. And how many of those things are, let's just say someone who's watching this is 30 years old. In the next 30 years, there is going to be an incredible demand for your dollars. And you are tying them up in retirement accounts, HSA and 529s. And again, you're doing that because you've been told to do that. I don't think that makes as much sense as it did in the 90s, to put money in a place where you cannot get it and where it doesn't benefit you and help you today. And let me just be perfectly clear. I'm not saying savings is bad, okay? I'm just saying we have to understand what's going on in our economy and what's gonna work and what's not. I'm not saying that if you put money in the stock market or retirement account, it's not gonna go up, right, over the long term. But guys, it's not that simple anymore. It's not as simple as it's gonna go up. How much is it gonna go up? And then when I take it out, what's my net? Because a lot of times what you hear quoted is gross. Oh, the S&P, and that's the other thing. You hear all kinds of numbers on that. You'll hear anywhere from the S&P 500 averages 7% a year to 14% or 12%. It depends on who you ask, right? If you actually wanna look it up, there is an answer. Whatever their number is, let's just say it's 8%, that is a gross number. So what comes after gross? Taxes, first of all, anything you paid your financial advisor and anything you paid a mutual fund manager. So in some cases, you're fourth in line to get paid on those accounts. So we don't really care what the gross is, we care what the net is. So again, savings isn't bad, retirement accounts are not inherently bad. I don't think they are as advantageous as they are being advertised to be in a highly inflationary environment. Reason number 4, you're not getting ahead financially. You don't understand inflation. And I don't know that it's taught in schools. It wasn't when I was there. I know I had an economy class in 9th grade. I don't remember talking about inflation. And to be fair, the people that talk about inflation all the time, politicians and the media, they don't understand it either. And I've said it already, but inflation is the devaluing and the eroding of the value of the dollar. They say the Grand Canyon was formed because of mainly, the erosive effects of water over time on rock and probably wind as well. And so what's happened over a very long period of time is that water has carved out those gigantic gullies and valleys in the Grand Canyon, okay? So what was once probably just a big chunk of rock now has this incredible system of valleys and gullies that goes all the way through it. And what has done that is water, the erosive effect of water. So when there is a certain amount of money floating around in our monetary system, and then they print more of it, the value of everything that was already there before they printed more loses its value. The inherent value of all the things you want to buy stays fixed, but the value of what you have to pay for it decreases. That's inflation. And the numbers are just so mind-boggling now on how much money they print. So all that to say, you just got to understand there is a massive force working against your savings and your earnings. And if you understand it, you can understand how to insulate yourself from it, first of all, and get ahead of it, secondly. Reason number 5 you're not getting ahead financially is because in an inflationary environment, you really, and I think this is good in any kind of economy, but you really need to have a source of income that you control, number 1, and that you can grow, number 2. So again, most people that are, getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, W-2 income, that's fine, but you don't control that source of income, right? So if the company has a bad day, you could get let go. If you don't do well, if you have a rough week or a rough month, you could get let go. If you absolutely crush it at your job, there is not necessarily going to be an immediate or even a guaranteed increase at all. So you don't control that source of income. And most people live on 1 to 2 W-2 sources of income. Their whole livelihood, their benefits, all of their income, everything is riding on 1 to 2 sources of income that they don't control. The other thing you can't do is grow it. You have a family, right? Just the nature of having a family, needing a bigger place to live, buying more groceries, providing education, childcare, whatever the case may be, that is an increase in expenses, right? And it's not an increase because you went and bought a Maserati, right? It's a very justifiable good increase in expenses. But just because you decide to do that, you cannot willingly increase your income because your expenses went higher. I think that's a little problematic. I think everybody should work on developing at least one source of income that you can control and increase if you would like, even if it's small. And then eventually, if you get one, you can get more than one. Reason number 6 you're not getting ahead financially is because you're trying to cut expenses to get ahead. This is a core tenet of 90s financial advice. Budget, every dollar has a home, just cut expenses, cut expenses, cut expenses. And if you're not getting ahead, if you're falling behind, it's because you did something wrong or you overspent. Can that be the case? Yeah. I mean, if you blow it and you go buy a bunch of toys and a bunch of stuff, yeah, that absolutely can work against you, especially if you finance it with a credit card. Does that happen? Yes. That's not the audience who I'm talking to. That's not who's watching this video. You're watching this video because you've done everything that you know how to do and you've been responsible. And I'm not saying everybody's perfect, but you've been responsible. So in an inflationary environment, cutting expenses is not sustainable. So you make $60,000 a year, they print money and all of a sudden that $60,000 is worth $55,000 and then it's worth $50,000. It's not gonna make sense to just keep throwing things off the ship to keep it afloat because they printed money, right? That on some level, you're gonna get to expenses where you can't just keep cutting things. And then reason number 7, you're not getting ahead financially is because you're investing for appreciation only. When you invest in different assets, there are 3 different ways you can get a return. Number 1 is obviously appreciation. Appreciation is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. The other thing you could get, which I think is far more valuable, is cash flow. And the last thing you could get is tax benefits. What do I mean by tax benefits? You can buy assets that reduce your tax burden, reduce your tax liability, which means that you pay less in taxes, which means that you keep more money in your pocket. What we've been told to do forever is to throw money into the stock market, in the S&P 500, mutual funds, whatever, let it sit forever and let it just grow. And that's, again, I'm not saying this is necessarily bad. It doesn't solve the inflation problem and it doesn't solve the cash flow problem. That's great that you will have a bunch of money potentially at 59.5 or later, but you have to get to 59.5. You have to make it from where you are now to 59.5, and what's happening at higher and higher rates, and I just saw an article on this, they said 401ks become the emergency fund for the American family, is that people are shattering the glass and taking money out. And I understand why they're doing it. It's because they're drowning and the room is shrinking because of inflation. When you invest for cash flow, you can realize a benefit from your asset without having to sell the asset to realize benefit. What do I mean by that? So if you buy Apple stock, the only way you can realize a benefit from that stock is by selling it. 2 things happen when you sell it. Number 1 is taxes. So if you had a $50,000 gain on your Apple stock and it was long-term capital gains, 20% of that goes to the government, $10,000 down. So you had a $50,000 gain, you get $40,000. That's not necessarily the most efficient way to build wealth. The second thing that happens when you sell an appreciating asset is you forego and you lose whatever continued appreciation that asset could have earned if you had stayed invested. With an asset that produces cash flow, the asset can grow and appreciate in value, and it will pay you monthly or quarterly or whatever the case may be to own it. So you can realize benefit from that asset without having to sell it, which means no taxes on the capital gains, and you're not messing with the growth. So the bottom line here is what I'm doing personally and what I think is best is to invest for cash flow. I still want some appreciation, but cash flow is what makes the world go round. There's nothing wrong with investing for appreciation through the stock market, but you need to be very clear about what the actual benefit is. And I think we also need to look a little bit harder and a little bit more critically at what this could look like if you're depending on it for your retirement. I think the way that it's performed over the past decades and what you've been told about it, I just don't know that that's necessarily going to be the same in the future. And that's another video. So thank you for watching this video on the 7 reasons why you're not getting ahead financially. There's lots more to say, and I'll see you in the next video.